All right, folks, welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Justin, here with a quick word before we dive in. Now, in this episode, I chat with game developer, CEO of Pirate Software, and hacker Jason Thor Hall about internet security, classic games, Coast to Coast AM, his game Heartbound, and more. As always, if you're listening on your podcasting platform of choice out there and you'd like to help the show grow, please leave us a review. And if you happen to be watching the video on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff because it does help. Anyway, without further ado, here you go. All right, Thor, man, take us back in time. You're a youngster. Are you a book reader, fort builder, troublemaker? Are you all the above?
Dude, I was all of the above.
All right.
Oh man, I caused so many problems as a kid. It was ridiculous. Yeah.
Whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California, actually. So, yeah, God, I'm trying to remember. It's like Costa Mesa and Tustin, like so all around Orange County, around a lot of different places. Yeah, I lived all over the place.
So did you you said you read books, did you have maybe a writer, an author, or a genre that you lean towards?
Not really. I do like fantasy, more
Mm.
than a lot of anything. I grew up on stuff like Harry Potter. Grew up on things like actually. Do you know Anne McCaffrey?
Yeah.
The whole Dragon Riders of Pern series.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I was super into that. And Anne Rice's stuff, so like all the vampire stuff. Like I was super into all of that. And
Love it,
I read a
man.
lot of that as a kid. Growing up, absolutely legend. The amount of books that she wrote, like holy moly, too sometimes like 10 a year or some ridiculousness. Like, how do you do that? She's like a printer.
Anne Rice the same way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mind boggling.
When you think back to formative films and TV shows you grew up on, what comes to mind?
Films going all the way back because it's going to be like Hackers. The movie Hackers is fantastic. Stuff like Lost Boys is phenomenal.
Yeah,
you know, in terms of TV shows like Stargate SG-1 and Star Trek Next Generation. I always like Star Trek a lot, especially TNG. TNG is just good. Teaches a lot of really good values. Really enjoy that. Sliders. Love the hell out of Sliders.
Sliders was great, man.
It was a really good show and it just disappeared and I was very sad about it. I'm trying to like that takes me back because there's a lot of stuff. Because like my dad was in cinematics. So we watched tons of movies all the time. I was exposed to tons of media as a kid, like tons and tons of movies, and I kind of got a general style for the types of things that I liked. But that's why I ended up watching all those things. He's like, "We're gonna watch Stargate SG-1." I was like, "Why?" And then I was like, "Oh, this is actually really cool."
Yeah. From OG techies, I feel like the next generation just gets a lot of hate.
Yeah, it does
From some people.
I think the reason why I like it so much is because it's a journey of Picard being just a complete jackass in the beginning. He's an awful captain, and then by the end he's just brilliant, and you can see his character growth through the entire series. And it's great, it's really a good story. It's a very hero's journey for that, and I liked it. I like it a lot, and I think if you just watch like a piece of it, the context doesn't come through. You have to watch it all, the whole thing, and it is bingeable. You can just sit down and do the whole thing.
Oh, for sure. Your dad was obviously, techie, gamer type. What was your first gaming system?
Oh, geez, it was a DOS box when I was a kid, and I can't even remember the games that I was on. Because like when I was really young, my dad was like, "Oh, I don't want you playing games because like it might be bad, all these types of things." And like he wouldn't let me play Diablo or any of that stuff when they launched it. It was like, "Oh no, it's gonna be bad for the youth," And then later he's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. None of this matters. It's fine. You can just go play these things." And I finally got to go play it. But yeah, first machine was a DOS box ages and ages and ages ago, and trying to remember what else. I played console for a little while. I never was much of a console gamer though. Like to be honest with you. I think the last time I did that was back in like Destiny 1 days, and that was it.
Wow.
It was the last time I was really into console. But outside of that, Game Boy was huge. So not normal consoles, but like handheld consoles. I've played everything on Game Boy since forever. Like every iteration of handheld that they've brought out. I've got my Game Boy Micro right here. Yeah, I've had those for ages, and I still play games on them today. In fact, I just got a little device that lets me play them on original hardware into my computer, which is pretty nice.
Holy shit.
So yeah, I'm really into that, like super into the handhelds.
Yeah, I remember being mind blown when the SP first came out.
Oh yeah, like it's crazy to me to see how far they've pushed handhelds like that, where the battery life is amazing now too. Because like you can play on some of those for just like 24 hours, no problem now without charging it. But like when I grew up, we were like scrounging the batteries out of the TV remotes and shit. Like that's not like we were just stealing. It was like, where's the TV remote battery? I don't know. Definitely not playing games in the bathroom. You know, like that's how that was. You know, like they just absorbed the hell out of all the power sources in the house. So
Yeah, and since smartphones are so common now and everyone has them, when you had those handhelds, there was no other way that you had technology, like driving in the car, going to the grocery store or something. It's like
yeah,
first time you could take a game with you, and it was just crazy.
yeah. The first iteration of that too, there was no backlights.
Yeah.
So like it was one of those things where your mom would be driving down the street, you're sitting in the back seat playing the Game Boy, and you're like, I'm going to choose a move for my Pokemon every time a light goes by. And like that was the thing,
Yeah.
like we played like that. And unless you were cool enough to have the squiggly light, which not all of us had the squiggly light. I got one later, but it was a long time later.
Yeah, I would just use a headlamp sometimes.
But yeah, there you go.
So, what sort of music was playing around the house when you were growing up?
Honestly, music wasn't that big to me
Mm.
until I was like older. I used to listen to radio shows all the time. So when I was younger, I'd listen to Coast because it was like way late at night. I'd get home from school and I'd turn on the radio. I was like, oh, it's Coast to Coast. I'm going to hear about the weird stuff. So I'd listen to that all the time, man. I still do. I actually still listen to Coast. I've got a software defined radio they run out of my office here, and I just have an antenna and I listen to Coast on it. It's quite funny.
I never would have guessed that, man. Art Bell days, the glory
Oh yeah,
days.
oh yeah, hell yeah. So all the Art Bell stuff, and now, God, they've changed hosts so many times now, but I still like Art Bell stuff the most. Like
Yeah,
that.
you can't beat that smoker's
No.
voice.
Yeah, I can't even do it. He's got that super deep, gravelly voice, man. Blew me away.
Hey, man, you got a Stern thing going on yourself. I know you've heard
Yeah, I
it,
know, right?
but you hear it all the time. But as a Stern listener growing up, that's the first thing that
Hey
kind
now.
of caught my. Yeah, exactly.
I listen to Howard Stern too, but that's because my dad would listen to it on the radio, like in the car.
Right.
So listen to Howard Stern all the time, and then he went to like XM radio. And I don't think I've ever heard anything of his again. He went to satellite and he just disappeared. You know.
I mean, obviously, it's worked for him, but for the us normal listeners, I'm not jumping ship to listen to Howard Stern. But if he was on
Yeah.
terrestrial, I'll still listen to him.
100%. I think satellite was one of those things where it was like, well, I guess he's gone.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I never heard anything from him again. Yeah.
So, Thor, it's just something I like to ask everyone, just because you never know what scared you as a kid.
Oh man. Hmm. I was really into paranormal stuff as a kid because obviously, like listening to Coast to
Yeah,
Coast,
coast to
like,
coast,
oh,
you got to
I
be.
want to go find stuff. But like, I was always worried something like that would just be like, oh, it would ruin your life, like a curse or something like that. But like, I think that was probably the scariest thing to me. And now that I'm older, scariest thing that I have now is like, oh, the tax man is probably the most horrifying thing that exists as an adult human being in the planet. It's like, oh, the IRS is going to eat my lunch. Fantastic. Like there's not that much that's scary anymore. It's mostly like when I was a kid, it was mostly like stuff like that, the unknown sort of thing. So now it's like, oh, it's the known things that are way scarier. That's way more horrifying, frankly.
Yeah, it seems like when you get older, you lean towards the unknown to escape the real stuff.
Oh yeah. Now you're like, wait a minute, I like it over there. It's weirder. I'm going to do that instead.
Right. So, you said you didn't play consoles that much, but what about specific games? What are some formative games that you grew up on?
Final Fantasy series really early on. I loved Final Fantasy. I loved Dragon Quest. Trying to think of what else. There's like a lot of really, really interesting games that I played. I've got a ton of them now. Actually, Boktai. There's a really good example. You ever played Boktai before?
Have not.
So Boktai was actually a Kojima game, which is wild to think about, like way back then, like Hideo Kojima, right? And it's a cartridge that has a solar sensor on the back so that you can fight vampires using the actual sun. Which
Holy
now
shit.
you understand how it's a Kojima game, right? And
Yeah.
there's two of them. There's a third one that's in Japan, but like I've had those since I was a kid. And like things like that really changed the way that I saw media, where it's like, wait a minute, we can build a custom device to sense the sun. It's actually a UV detector, right? So that we can fight vampires in a video game. That's the coolest controller I've ever heard, right? Like that's so damn awesome. And then you had things like Kirby's Tilt and Tumble and stuff like that, where they have weird control methods too, and they just kind of stuck with me. That always just stuck with me, like neat ideas, different ways to play games. You know,
Speaking of sort of antiquated gaming technology, do you remember the Dex drive?
the Dex Drive. Let me go look this thing up.
See, because I interviewed James Roth recently, and he had, with all his little quirky stuff he does, I'd assumed he had run across one, never heard of it.
I don't even know what that is. Never even heard of that. No.
Jeez, man. Well, it was like this little device that you could hook into your computer and then put your memory card into the slot and then download other people's saves.
I have never seen that, man. See, I never got into like modding the games or like editing save files or any of that stuff. I just played them, you know, like that was the biggest thing for me. And I got a ton of them still, but no, never did that. I didn't even have a Game Shark or any of that. Like everybody always had a Game Shark. Oh, I'm going to edit my save. I'm going to cheat a video game. It's like, dude, I didn't even have that stuff. I just played the game.
See, that's what it was for, because I had one of those CDX Game Sharks and mine didn't work. So the only way that I could get the code to work was to download someone else's save file that could get it to work.
That makes
It's
sense.
a whole going around your elbow thing.
Yeah, there was always like moments like that. There were always weird things of like different devices and all kinds of homebrew stuff and like different ways to like cheat at stuff. Like I remember when Missing No was found in like Pokemon Red and Blue, and then, like everyone at school is like, "You gotta get your Missing No," and everyone's save file gets corrupted and it just goes to shit. You know? Like there was a whole nightmare.
I still remember the steps to get that thing surfing up and down the Cinnabar Island gym.
Oh yeah, yeah, right up on the side there until it hits, and then you're like, "Cool, my file's deleted."
So how early on do you begin to maybe experiment creatively, become interested in making your own stuff? Not in just games, but obviously short stories
Super
and
young.
stuff go into games and stuff too.
Yeah, super super young. So I was in elementary school, and I would. This is so funny. I used to draw bookmarks and then sell them to other kids. Be like, yeah, I'll make you a bookmark for a quarter. And I actually ended up getting a lot of money doing that. I was like, cool. Like I'm actually running a business, right? And I would just draw all kinds of stuff and then put them on there, and then people would buy them. And then later on, I in high school, I became the leader of comic book club. So I started comic book club, but it wasn't like we're collecting comics. It was we're making them.
Oh,
So everyone's making comic books and like doing this kind of stuff. And that was a lot of fun, you know? And then that's actually when I made the comic that is Heartbound today, because I made it when I was like 16. And then after that, I just kept making stuff. I just kept doing things. And it was like mostly side project stuff and like trying things and working freelance and doing everything like that. But it just never stopped, you know?
do you also do the art side of things?
So I do art for myself now. I used to do it for like freelance for money.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that it removed something from that I really enjoyed when I pinned work onto it. And I was like, no, I kind of just want to do this because I want to do this for me, you know? So I stopped doing art side, visual stuff for work. The only thing that I do now for visual side stuff is technical art. So I do particle effects, lighting, shadows, you know, things like that. And then the visual framing for the games. Cause like I like doing that very, you know, kind of make it as cinematic as I can. And that's fun for me. And it's at that realm where it's like, no, I like doing this and I like doing this for work. Not just I like doing it, you know.
Beyond all the technical aspects of building a game, if the storytelling falls short, it's all for naught. So have you experimented since those early days, the comic days that you mentioned? Have you written any fiction or anything like that?
Oh yeah. I wrote all of Heartbound, all of it. So I'm the programmer, writer, and designer for the game. And there's thousands of routes through it right now. And that means like tons and tons of different timelines that people can do. And I had to make sure that every one of those storylines fits narratively based on the choices the player made. So it's not a small task with writing. It's quite a huge amount, but like we've also translated it into 6 different languages. So making sure that the puns work in like Brazilian Portuguese, making sure that a joke is appropriate in Japan, right? You know, like we have to localize that as well. So I have to work with the translators to make sure that the original English comes through, but is contextually like funny for people in another area of the world, you know? So it's not simple that way either. It's a good puzzle. It's a lot of fun to do, to be honest with you. And this is probably the largest writing project I've ever taken on, but it won't be the last. So
I'm just trying to understand, trying to for someone I'm trying to approach it from a someone who writes short stories and scripts and stuff like that. How does the outlining or process look for a game? Is there a lot of go with the flow and fix it later type of
I
deal going
actually I learned how to do that in Dungeons and Dragons. So
on?
what I do a lot of, yeah, I played D&D for years, right? Like God, it's going on 20 years now. Jesus. It's old now, you know. But no, I started that there, and it's basically like I have the characters as they are at the beginning of the story. I have the characters as they are at the end of the story. And I work from the outside inwards towards the middle to figure out what is it that changes them to reach that point. And I may have the characters that they have to interact with, but it's like, okay, this character has these aspirations, this character has these traits, they have this mentality, they have this way of perceiving the world. If I were to role play that character, how would they react to this scenario? And I basically just kind of step into each character, role play each one in that scenario while still working towards that end goal for the story. And it's the same thing that I learned from D&D. And a lot of that comes from the fact that in D&D, you're just role playing characters with other people that are playing your game, you know, and it ended up being like a model that worked, and it actually allows me to go forward with the story, especially in a choose your own adventure one, you know, like where they are actually choosing the choices. So it's not just static. I think
Yeah,
that'd probably be harder for me if it was all static.
yeah. So can you pinpoint where along your journey growing up that you decided that you wanted to pursue gaming professionally or like game development professionally, or did it just sort of happen
Yeah.
that way?
So like I always kind of wanted to do that. I was always like, man, one day I'm going to do that. I'm working in AAA, and one day I'm going to go, you know, leave AAA and do this. And then it was funny because Undertale came out, and I was like, what the hell am I waiting for? Right? Like if somebody can go make something like this and they can do it where there's flaws in it, there's like art flaws, there's like storyline, there's little pieces that are, you know, it's an indie, right? And you see that and you're like, well, why am I not doing this? Like, why am I waiting in AAA? Am I really getting the skills that I need here to go make the thing that I really want to make one day? Or am I just spinning my wheels? It turned out I was just spinning my wheels. So I actually applied at Blizzard to go do what is called the side projects and side project committee. I was the first one that got approved, and I went and made a tiny arcade game, you know, and that little arcade game did okay, but it set the groundwork for me to be like, okay, I can go make things now because I
Mm.
can make a game. We can launch it on Steam. We can do all the Steam trading cards, the achievements, and everything that goes along with that. And now that we have it out there, I know how to patch it. I know how to build a game in the market and tell people about it, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, let's go make stuff. And we started, started running with it and made an RPG and just went. And that's Heartbound. And the first one was Champions of Breakfast. And it's worked out really, really nicely because it was one of those things where I always wanted to do it. I just didn't take the chance. And at that point, it was like, I'm just going to take the chance now. Like, screw it. There's what's going to happen if I fail? I still have a day job, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's fine.
Yeah. So the relationship with Blizzard, I mean, obviously your dad worked there. Did he just, help you
Yeah.
get in the door initially?
So he did back in 2004. So there was a bit of nepotism that happened there, which I don't like, right? So like I
Right.
stayed there for about 6 months and I was terrible at the job. I was awful, 100%. And I left because it was like a lot of shame from that. It's like, I only got this job because of you. I'm not very good at it. This sucks. So I left and I went freelance for about 5 years and I made stuff online. I actually built things in Second Life, as funny as that is. Did a whole ton of commissions. Actually moved out, went off, and lived on my own in Colorado, and like learned programming, learned how to do 3D modeling and texturing, and like releasing things, and living on my own off my own creations, everything like that. And then I came back to Blizzard in 2009, and I applied again, and I got the job without him. And that was the whole point for me, was to make sure that I got a job at a place like that, not without his help. Because it can't be a good thing. It's never a good thing to have nepotism be there, because some people will close doors on you just based on the fact that you are related to someone. Some people will open doors for you that you don't deserve based on the same thing. And no one knew that he was my dad until I think I was leaving QA to go to BattleNet, because I had started a team on BattleNet, which was application security, and I became the lead of AppSec there. And my boss in QA was like, why are you talking to Joey Ray? Because I was talking to him in the quad in front of, in the middle of campus at Blizzard. And I was like, that's my dad. And he goes, what? Just like freaked him out. I was like, yeah, that's him. I just never told you because it's not relevant to my job. That's kind of the point. So yeah, no one knew. And it was kind of like an open secret, I guess. The people who knew, but it didn't matter. And that was the whole idea behind it, because it's never a good thing, man. It'll never do you any good to get jobs through nepotism. You'll just end up not knowing anything and People won't respect you for who you are.
Right. Do you think there was some that first stint that your dad did help you with? Do you think there was some resentment with the people that knew?
I don't know if there was any resentment because it was like me and another person. It's me and this guy Benny, and we were really young. Like we are just kind of young, dumb kids, and they're like, "Oh, they got game testers in there." And I think the first week that I worked there, we broke CDs. Like that was my job, was to break CDs in a small room. Because like we had this little like shredder machine that you put the CD in and it like covers it in dots and destroys the CD. And it broke within like the third CD. And I was like, well, guess we're breaking all these CDs. We just had to shatter them all. It was like a mess into a big cardboard box. So I don't think there was a lot of resentment, mostly because we were doing, well, to be honest, we were doing kind of bitch work, right? You know? That's really what it was. So
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Thor, but I think you've mentioned multiple times that a lot of your work at Blizzard was banning botters.
yeah.
So, in that job, was there one botter specifically that you can think of that maybe you were impressed at their methods, or were they extra clever?
There was actually a dude that I never caught. I think about it all the time. I've talked about it on stream before too. Like there was this guy that had made a ton of map hacks, right? Tons of map hacks for the games, and they wanted to go after him and everything like that. They finally decided, hey, we're going to go after him. We're going to send you after him because you're good at catching people with this stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go after this dude. I look up everything he had made for like 15 years because he'd been doing it a long time. Every single possible thing. Pulled all the original files, not even ones that are like, oh, that's still available for download. Like, no, we got the original files. Guy had scrubbed everything clean. There was absolutely no file pass on anything. There was no naming anywhere. He was clean from the start. And I was like, that is ridiculous. Who are you? Right. So I got pretty obsessed with this for like 6 months. And there was nothing that I could find. And I brought it back and was like, there's nothing we can do. And I think they eventually went after his like monetary. They went after his PayPal. They subpoenaed his PayPal, and they found the dude had never transferred any money away. So it was like, even that was a shell that didn't matter. It was just like a leaderboard for the dude. And I was like, God damn it. You know, like we're never going to get him. Right. And it turned out like the whole time he was taunting everyone too. So he'd do things like order merchandise in the middle of a forest in Vermont with a stolen credit card with his name, you know, like just like, you bastard. Like we were always trying to find this dude and you just couldn't get him. And that was it. And I think about it now and he's probably still out there, and like tip of the hat to you, because he's the only one I couldn't get, man. He bothers me all the time. I'm like, dude, who is he? You know, it's like, is he an insider? Is he just some kid? Like what happened there? But he'd been doing it for so long that he had to be an expert somewhere.
Yes, so clearly he knew what he was doing.
Oh, he 100% did. And that's rare. Usually people make a mistake, right? Even people who leak things inside of the company, like they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna take a screenshot with my phone and I'm gonna release it on the internet. No one will know it's me because it's from a phone. And it's like, dude, you were on company Wi-Fi when you did that. Like, what? Like, you know, it's just like you'll see those types of things, and then you have someone like this who's actually truly good, someone who's really secret, you know, and that's very rare. So.
You know, so obviously, just sticking on Blizzard for a second, they've been
Sure.
dealing with some issues in recent years. Can you take us through a bit of the bullshit that you dealt with during your time there, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So I ended up quitting Blizzard because of the bullshit. 100%. I saw a lot of really bad stuff when I was there. I saw a lot of really terrible things, and I also saw like, you know, a lot of good stuff with people that I got to work with. But it was usually management, kind of middle management, usually had the biggest problem. The best way I could describe it is festering, right? You have a lot of people that have a lot of power that try to impose that power instead of just trying to do best by the players and best by the business, right? And that got really old really quick. I ended up leaving QA as a result of that because it was really, really toxic and really underpaid. As a good example of this, when I started at Blizzard, I was paid $10.50 an hour on night crew. When I left, and that's Southern California. So the going rate at the time for like Trader Joe's being a grocery store bagger was $12 an hour. And I was paid $10.50. Yeah, it's awful, right? So I was on night crew during that. And one day they told us when we came in, hey, we've got a really critical task. You got to go do this task. Everyone's doing the same task together. And they gave me this sheet that had like 30 plus questions on it, like 30 plus steps. And they're like, make sure to read the entire task. So I sit down and read the entire task. And like step 16 is turn off your computer, get up from your desk, walk out of the room. And I was like, that's weird. So I read the rest of the task. I read it again. And I get up out of my desk and I walk out of the room. The last two people to walk out of the room got fired. We were all going to day crew and they needed to cut 2 people. And that's how they decided to do it. That was the first moment that I realized this place is a shit show, actually. Like this is that's terrifying. That makes no sense. And that's how they got fired. And we moved over to Day Crew. When I moved over to Day Crew and I like signed all the stuff and everything like that, I don't know if it was that I didn't pay very much attention or if they didn't explain it to me. The next paycheck, I was like, why is this so little? Like, what happened? My pay had gone down to $10 an hour from $10.50. So I went to talk to my manager. I was like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, the 50 cents an hour was a night crew differential. You lost it when you went to days. And it's like, I didn't have a choice. I didn't choose to go to days. You dissolved the team, but I had to eat it, right? So then I got moved into StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty, and we worked 2 years straight of overtime on Wings of Liberty. 2 years straight of OT. Sometimes 6-7 days a week, sometimes 10-12 hours a day. It was a mess, man. I don't play that game to this day. I won't even look at it.
Don't blame you, dude.
But I was on the editor team for that, and it was in QA on the editor team. It was a mess. And the reason why we had so much overtime on that was mismanagement, because the QA lead's idea for this was that his quote is the weirdest quote I've ever heard in my life. We will get ahead of development. QA is not able to do that. You can't test things that are not ready yet. So at the time I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, boss, like I like my job, I'm going to do that. And everyone else was like, this doesn't make any damn sense. I was like, you're right. And it's like, are we going to do anything about it? Nah, like whatever, we're getting a lot more money, I guess, but like everyone's burning out. Everyone's just working shitloads of hours. And it was awful. And it made no sense. It made absolutely no sense at all. You cannot get ahead of development as QA. You test things that are ready for test, and that's it. And that was it. I think the other thing that I learned in there was a kind of a toxic culture thing that we see across the industry right now as well, which is the idea that QA and dev are somehow different, that they're separate in some way. A lot of weird, like kind of class vibes where it's like, oh, those are the cool kids. We're just, we're the under people, that doesn't make any sense. QA and development's the same damn team. And it always has been. Yeah. And that's something that I learned when I was there, not because they taught the right practice, but because they taught the wrong practice. And that showed me like, no, this is wrong. Like QA and development's the same team. And the first time I saw that done well was actually Overwatch. So Overwatch 1 had embedded QA. So QA was with development in the same area, and that game turned out phenomenal. And it shows that model works, but outside of that, it was always things like that, where it's just like, why are you doing this in the worst possible way? It doesn't make any sense. And why are you just treating people so badly? It's expendable sort of behavior. It's weird. It was awful.
Right. And when you start noticing how shitty this is, do you ever approach your dad just to ask him, is this commonplace? Did this happen when you were there, or what's going on? Was there
I've talked to him about it. Yeah, I've talked to him about it before. And he since he was the director of cinematics, he was like, I can save my team, but I can't save anything outside of this. So he would strive to try and keep the cinematics team taken care of. And he's still friends with basically everyone who's worked under him as a result of that, So like, that's really what that comes down to, is if you treat your people correctly, then they'll always be willing to work with you going forward into the rest of your career. And so I've taken that and done the same thing for myself. I make sure that all of our people are paid. Our moderators are paid, even like, and a lot of mods don't get paid on Twitch. It's usually like a free thing. So yeah, make sure that everybody's taken care of.
Post Blizzard, where do you head directly after that? I wanted to ask you, it's funny since you mentioned Coast to Coast too. I have this written down here that when you worked with the feds, could you tell us any about the X-Files?
No. Yeah, I can't tell you anything about that, actually. So when I worked for the Department of Energy, the best thing that I can tell you is I hacked power plants for the federal government. That was my last job. And they flew me around the country to hack those facilities. And it was to keep our power grid safer. That's it. That's all I got for you. I wish I could tell you more, but I can't, because they'll appear out of my walls or something, man. Like, it's not good. But no, that was my last major job before this. But yeah, after Blizzard, I ended up going to Amazon Game Studio. It was right up the street. It's like 4 minutes away. They flew me up to Seattle, did like a 10-hour long interview, flew me back down to California, and they gave me a job in California. I was like, why? But okay, fine. Whatever. So I did that, got the job there, and I was doing automation frameworks for the Lumberyard game engine, which was a mess. It was a complete mess. And it's because they took a slice of CryEngine, turned it into their own engine, and it was just not good, So I found a bunch of vulnerabilities on that. And at that time, are you aware of DEF CON? You ever seen DEF CON before?
Mm-mm.
So DEF CON's a hacking convention in Vegas every year. About 30,000 of us show up and, hack the planet, have some fun, do some cool shit.
Sounds
and
terrifying.
we compete. Yeah, it is a little terrifying. But we compete with each other, and we have this thing called a black badge, an Uber badge, right? So if you win a challenge, there's a chance that challenge will be nominated as a black badge challenge. You don't know till the end, right? And if you get a black badge, you go to DEF CON for free for life, and it is highly regarded among our community of people. I got 3 in a row. So DEF CON 23, 24, and 25. Hat trick is not like a normal thing to get. So the first one, people are like, wow, I got one. And the second one, they're like, wait a minute. And the third one, while I was at Amazon Game Studio, the DOE, approached me and they're like, hey, do you want to go hack those power plants? And I was like, I love money. So like, yes, So that time of my life, I was like, holy shit, I'm finally being paid like a human being. That was the first job, like, leaving Blizzard and going to Amazon Game Studio. I tripled my pay. And it was like, for 10% of the workload. So I was like, oh my God, I have money. I could do things now, right? I can eat more than once a day, maybe, and that was a really big eye opener. So there was a little bit of gold lust happening at that time in my life where I was like, the government's going to pay me even more. Done. I'm in. And I got to, hack power plants. It's kind of cool shit. I get to learn a bunch of stuff, find out how all this stuff works. And then I stayed there for a year. And then on my 7-person team, 4 people quit the same day. They went to go make their own security firm. So they wanted to increase my hours from 10 weeks of work a year flying around the country to 30 with the same pay. And I was like, dude, I'm not, like, that's more than half the year I wouldn't be at home. Like, what's the point of I just live out of hotels at that point, right? So I quit and I was like, I'm going to take 2 weeks. Maybe I'll go back to Amazon because they were offering me a position for a lead security position to do security for their games. And it was still open. They did that when I was leaving, and it was still open there. And I was like, I'm going to figure out what I want to do. And 2 days later, Jacksepticeye played our game Heartbound, and the community just blew up. And I was like, well, guess I'm doing this then. And I have never stopped, and I've just been doing it ever since. So
feel free to shut me down on this, but were you encouraged or discouraged about how easy or hard it was to hack the power plants?
Dude, I wish I could tell you that.
Got it.
Yeah.
So
there's very few things I can't tell you, but that's definitely one of them.
I had to ask. I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. You're fine. Shots for trying.
Exactly. It's fine. So when it comes to your average gaming user, what would you say is the most egregious password protection error a lot of people make?
Using the same password across multiple platforms is so common. It's absurd. I can't even describe to you how many times I've been on a pen test and there's a number of employees that have the same password as like something else, like an OnlyFans or some ridiculous thing that gets knocked over, right? And we'll get like a password list. We just try it against their employee account. It's like we get into like maybe 10 to 20% of them. And it's just because you use the same damn password. Don't do that. Even if you have 2-factor enabled, if you're using the same password on a website that gets its password stolen and you have 2-factor on that site, but you don't have 2-factor on another site and you use the same password, I'm in. It's such a common failure, such a lame failure to like use different passwords on every site, use 2-factor on everything you can, and that's it.
Gotcha. And you said earlier that the comic you were working on when you were younger, that was the Heartbound comic, right?
Yes.
So for folks that may not be familiar what Heartbound entails, just give us a elevator pitch for the game.
Sure. So I really like games that include choice, and I found that a lot of the ones that I could play out there didn't really give me choice, right? Things like Mass Effect and Fallout 4, like they tout that they're going to be really player choice driven, but the choices generally end up not mattering, right? So I wanted to create butterfly effect the game. And that means everything that you do, something changes somewhere. So how long it takes you to pick up an object? Do you pick up that object or not? Do you talk to a character or not? Do you choose what options with those character? How long does it take you to do that? Do you answer a question or do you wait when the question prompt comes up? There's all kinds of different things that get stored for this. And because of that, the game has thousands of routes. It's taken me about the last 7 years, minus 2 years, because I had COVID, almost bit it on that, which sucked. But so it's been about 5 years of dev time doing this. And it's mostly just every possible interaction I could think of. And to be real with you, it's incredibly complex. Even fight scenes that I have, because I have a boss fight in there that has like 72 routes in it. Totally different dialogue every single time, totally different outcomes, completely different, move sets that they'll use, all kinds of stuff for that one encounter. And most rooms are between 12 to 100 routes based on the choices the player has made. And to be real with you, we've got 60,000 sales and they still haven't found everything. and they
Mm.
probably never will. There are pieces of that game that I have made that likely no one will ever see, or maybe just one or two people will see out of all of that. And I'm fine with that. I'm okay with creating very niche kind of experiences through this as long as they make sense, as long as they make narrative sense with that. So I take a long period of time to build each room. It's funny too, because we were like, oh, only one more room got made in a month. It's like, yeah, go play it again. Go try it again. Go try doing something different. You'll see what happens, right? And then people try and they're like, wait a minute. The whole environment changes. There's a whole chapter I couldn't access before. There's characters I've never met, and that's the kind of thing that I wanted to have in that old school 2D pixel art kind of game, and the inspirations for me, the biggest ones are Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore, the Earthbound series for the art style that we have, mostly Mother 3 for that, and then WarioWare for the combat system, because I love me some weird mini games,
Right.
Same time period. I grew up in the same time period as devs of Lisa, Knuckle Sandwich, Undertale. We're all echoing Earthbound at the end of the day, frankly.
Speaking of choices in games, I know you've been playing it from a game dev perspective. What do you think of Larian and Baldur's Gate 3 and all the just amount of ridiculous choices and different scenarios that game has?
I think it's absolutely phenomenal. I love seeing that. That was really inspiring to me, because it was like I thought this was only doable by people like me in the indie scene. You don't get to see that kind of stuff, those types of risks being taken from AAA most of the time. And seeing something like BG3 come out where they were allowed to take those kind of risks and make such a deep and interesting experience that can go so many different ways, that's great. And I know the monumental QA task that was to make sure that all of that worked, because it's not easy at all. It's really, really, really hard, to make sure that every route makes narrative sense, every route actually works. There's so many paths there, and I guarantee there's going to be things that people find in that game for years to come. It's the same kind of an idea.
What would you say is the most challenging aspect of game development, specifically on the indie level?
Mental, 100% the mental side. We live in a time where the tools are more accessible than ever before. You can use things like Godot or Game Maker for relatively free or relatively cheap. You can use all kinds of different tools like Ace Sprite that are super cheap, or even different other pixel editing programs that are free. You've got Blender for 3D stuff. The tool sets are there. We can just use those now, no matter where you are in the world. Sitting down and making something and showing it to someone else and being able to absorb that feedback in a way that doesn't tear you apart is very difficult for new devs. And the other thing that's really difficult is starting. Many people will be like, I'm going to make a game one day. I was like that, right? You just have to do it. And you live in a time where it's easier than any other time in history to do so. It is so easy and so cheap to get into this now that there's no reason to wait. But a lot of people kind of have that idea of, unless I make a big AAA game, no one's ever going to care. Okay, we'll go look at VVVVV, right? Look at that. That's amazing. And people really love it. Go look at Thomas Was Alone. It's a game about rectangles and it'll make you cry. Go look at Suits of Business RPG. It's drawn by hand, scanned into a computer and put up into a video game on Steam. There's so many weird and wild ideas out there. And people just focus on the major AAAs and MOBAs and MMOs and everything. And they want to do that because they think that's the only thing that people care about. And it's not true. There's so much more out there.
Well said. How did you, or are you, dealing with the mental side yourself?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm doing great, man. I've been ever since that beginning part where it's like I have enough income to pay my bills. I may live really frugally, right? Because I've done that for years. But in the beginning, I was making under federal minimum wage, and I still could survive off of that. And as long as I can pay my bills, I'm doing fine, man. Because I know the way that I want the game to be, and I know that when people give me feedback, whether it's angry or positive, I know that it's because they care, right? They care about the game enough that they want to give that kind of feedback to make it a better experience for themselves, and they think that it'll make it a better experience for other people as well. Sometimes that's correct, sometimes that's not correct, but each time that happens, it's like, okay, cool, I can take this and maybe I can do something with it. And it's not because they're a jerk, even when they're mad, right? It's because they care enough to leave a comment. Most people aren't going to leave a comment on your game when they don't like it. Most people just silently refund and they walk away. So if somebody leaves you negative feedback, listen to it. Even if you don't think they're right, find out how they got to the point where they feel that way about your game. What did you do to set the expectation where they feel like this? If you did something, sometimes it's not your fault. but it's always something to learn from, you know.
Well said. This is my buddy Jason said. So I know you're talking to Thor today. Ask him if he knows why the dodge mechanic in the console version of Diablo 3 was never implemented on the PC version. That shit drives me up the wall.
Oh, I don't know. I worked on Diablo 3 console though, but I was doing automation on that. Right. I was in QA at the time and I built custom hardware for us to do automation, which was nuts. But like, I don't know what the design choice for that was, man. And it's funny because even though I worked on that for so long, I've never played the console version of Diablo 3. I never have. I played the PC version for like 8,000 hours or something ridiculous, but the console I've never touched it because I just don't game on console really. I wish I had a better answer for it, man. But like I don't know. That's on them.
Right. So Thor, just programming wise, what would you say is the most challenging project you've worked on personally? Is there one you lost sleep over?
Oh, it's definitely Heartbound. Yeah, it's so complicated because I have to manage all those routes and timelines all the time, and it's a programming challenge sometimes. I guess it was a programming challenge in the beginning. It's not really a programming challenge anymore. I've built all the frameworks for it, but developing those frameworks took about a year, to build everything out and like make sure that everything worked. And then I kind of add little piecemeal modules and stuff to it all the time. But it's mostly kind of settled code now. But man, was that tough to set up in the first place to make sure that I could do that efficiently. And as a result, I've made it so the game works on integrated graphics from like 10 years ago. We ran it on a smart fridge. That was hilarious. We ran it on an Android watch. So like we know it works great, but like getting there was pretty rough. In the beginning, it was not very good. So
best programming advice you've been given and who gave it to you?
Best programming advice I've been given. I don't think I've ever really gotten programming advice.
John Romero said the same exact thing.
Yeah, I don't think
nobody wants to give you any advice.
No one ever wants to give you any advice. Because like you get to this point where people are like, "Oh, that's the programmer guy. I'm not going to tell him what to do," and like that's it. And like I went from teaching myself stuff to teaching other people stuff, and then they just don't want to tell you what to do anymore. And like that's it. And it's funny because sometimes people will give me, feedback on stream. They're like, why would you build that system that way? And I was like, oh, here's the reasons that I structured the system like this. Here's why. Here's what the rules generally are, the standards for this. This is why I broke those rules. This is the outcome of that. And this is the reasoning behind it. And they go, oh, you're right. I won't say anything anymore. It's like, oh, well, okay. Yeah. Because like there are rules in programming. There's general standards. You shouldn't break the rules and things like that. But once you get to a point where you're like, okay, I know what the rules are. I know what the effects of breaking these rules are. I know how this is going to affect the game in the end, the client, how it's going to affect performance. I'm going to break the rules here so I can do this really cool thing you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And once you start doing that, then you turn into like wizard magic mode and like people don't know how programming works anymore and they don't understand. And then they're like, well, yeah, just look at that guy, whatever he's doing,
Right.
And they just don't give you feedback anymore. That's it. That's all it is. You get the deep magics is just learning how to break the rules, I guess, and why.
Exactly. Seen any good movies lately?
I went and this is not even relevant because it's not like a movie that came out recently. I went back and watched Six String Samurai again this year, which is my favorite movie of all time. I love that movie so much. And I find myself more and more going back and watching older movies because I don't like a lot of the new movies that are coming out. I just don't want to see it anymore. Like I like a lot of the older stuff, and maybe that's like old man yells at cloud in a way, I guess. But like, I don't know, man. I kind of liked the old. I like practical effects in movies.
Yeah,
I think practical effects for me are like way more interesting. I think that's the thing that gets me because when it's all CG, I'm just like, okay, like yes, I see the systems that you used for this. I understand, and like
use
it's
CG
not
to augment the practical effects. That's what you should be doing.
Bingo. Yeah, I mean, you go to Flight of the Navigator, right? Flight of the Navigator did that brilliantly at the time. Absolutely incredible. A lot of that was practical. A lot of people didn't realize it. A lot of that was practical. Like that kind of stuff blows me away. It's really, really cool, and we don't really see a lot of practical effects now. Like one of my favorite movies is Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal is amazing. It's because all of those are puppets. Like that's some people don't realize it's Jim Henson, man. Like
yeah, it is.
it's some wild stuff. It's some really cool stuff. And you see today, and it'd all be animated. It'd be 100% animated, or it'd be CGI for all those characters. And I I like the puppeteering. I like the practical effect. I like stuff like that. Or as far as CGI goes, I think Rocky Horror Picture Show is kind of the limit for me, where they have like a couple of CGI things here and there, and the rest of it's just practical weirdness. I enjoy that a lot.
Gotcha, man. This is another question I like to ask everyone, Thor. Have you ever had an experience that you would consider supernatural or paranormal?
Dude, 100%. So when I was a kid and I used to go ghost hunting and stuff, right? And I still have no solution to this. And I know it doesn't make any sense. And I know the human being is like a 2 pounds of fat instead of a bone mech with meat armor. Like, I get it. We're weird. Everything we do is weird, and we can have weird hallucinations and shit. But I was in the kitchen at my dad's house when I was growing up. And we'd gotten home from ghost hunting the day before, and we didn't find anything because we go out with like night vision cameras and shit and have some fun. And I hear my brother walk into the room behind me because I'm facing away from the entrance to it because I'm cooking. And in like footsteps, you can kind of tell like who the footsteps are, who it is based on the weight that it is. I was like, oh, it's my brother. And I turned around, I was like, hey, and there was like a tall shadow thing standing in front of me in broad daylight, and I blacked out. And I was like, oh, well, I thought I was going to die, and then I blacked out. And I wake up on the floor, and I turn off the stove, and I walk out in the living room where my dad is, and I was like, hey, I think I need to go to the doctor. And I explained to him what I just seen. I was like, I'm clearly hallucinating. Like, this isn't real, obviously. And he goes, don't worry about it. I was like, why? He's like, we're all seeing it. And my stepmom, she's like super into witchcraft. So she got a sage wand and like burned it all around the windows and everything like that. And that was the solution to it. And I still have no answer for what any of that means. That doesn't make any damn sense to me even today. But it's the one time where I was like, okay, well, that one can't be explained. Mostly because if it was just me, it'd be like, okay, you're hallucinating. Something's wrong, right? But if multiple people are seeing the same thing, either he was straight up bullshitting me and my stepmom went along with it all the way, or he was telling the truth and I have no solution to this. I'll never know. He'll never tell me. So
sounds like you need to call Art Bell.
Yeah, I know, right? It was the only thing I've ever had where I was like, oh, that doesn't make any damn sense. Like, all right, fine. And now today I'm like, probably hallucination, probably screwing with me, but I'll never know,
And that definitely counts. Well, Thor, just to put a bow on this thing here, and I'll let you get out of here. What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so I'm going to be finishing Heartbound pretty soon here. I'm almost done with Animus, which is like the hardest chapter I've ever made for it. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to be working on a new game, which is a monster battler. We want to do a monster collection battler game, but cosmic horror, because I really, really like psychological horror. And cosmic horror is completely based around the idea that you can't see the monster. Because to perceive it, to experience the monster, the true thing that it is to die, right? So you can't do that. So that lends itself very well to psychological horror because you can't see the monster directly. And I love that. I really, really, really like that kind of, that kind of fear is not showing the thing directly, showing the influence of the thing or the echoes of the thing or the drippings of the thing coming into your world. And we want to do a monster collection game based around that. And like, have battles and all kinds of things and make an RPG out of it. Kind of like same realm as like Shin Megami Tensei or Yokai Watch, or the old Pokemon games. That's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. Before they started adding wristbands that make Pokemon giant and all the other weird bullshit that went along with it. Like I just want to go back to the roots of that and just make a creepy monster collector game,
Yeah, man, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to checking that out. Thor, thank you for giving me some of your time, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, dude. Sick. Yeah, I'll blast it out to the community when you do.
Appreciate you, man.
Nice talking to you, man.
Nice talking to you too. I'm a big fan. You keep going, man.
Yeah. See you around, dude.
See ya.